Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we have another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is our 56th deck in the series and it's called I Cast a Spell on You. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from Scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So really quickly, before we get into the actual deck tech, I do want to highlight some of our social media accounts and some other ways that you can support us if you are interested. So first off, we have our Twitter account, which is at 13POYNZ. Reddit, you can find us at u/POYNZ13. I know the two of them are reversed. I know it's a pain in the butt. I completely forgot when I made the second account. You can also email us over at dungeonlearnersguide@gmail.com. All of those are great ways to get in touch with us if you're looking to suggest cards for future content, if you're looking to suggest videos that you'd like to see, or if you just want to chat with us. Those are great ways to reach out. And then if you're looking to support us a little bit more directly, you can head on over to TCG Player using our affiliate link. We get a little bit of kickback from any cards you purchase through them that way. And if you're looking for even more direct support, we do have a Patreon account. There are several different tiers. There's a $3, a $5, and a $7 tier at the moment where you can get access to deck lists a week early. You can get access to a Discord or the opportunity to participate in some of the games, to suggest some games, suggest feedback on decks. And then at the very top, we also have a set of videos that are completely unedited. So whenever we put up new videos, you can see the unedited gameplay with all of the commentary and everything from the players as well. So if that's something you're interested in, feel free to head on over there. And I do want to shout out our first patron, William Swiftfoot. Thank you very much for all of the support. And if none of those are your style, you can, of course, always just like the video and subscribe to the channel. That does help out quite a bit, and thank you very much to everyone who supports us. But without any further ado, I suppose it's time we jump into our deck tech for the week. So this week, we have a suggested card coming from Malsomnus, I hope I pronounced that right, over on Reddit, and that card is Splicer's Skill. So Splicer's Skill is a 2 and a white sorcery that creates a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token, and we can splice onto instant or sorcery for 3 and a white, which means as you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may reveal this card from your hand and pay its splice cost. If you do, add this card's effects to that spell. So essentially, we can cast Splicer's Skill alongside any other of our instants and sorceries without actually using up the card of Splicer's Skill. So it stays in our hand, but we still get the effect. And so with that in mind, I tried to find some cards that would work super well with this. And originally I was thinking of a Jeskai build, so red, white, and blue. But I decided actually, when I started to look for commanders, I wanted something a little bit different. So we dropped the blue and replaced it with black. So instead, we are playing a white, black, and red commander in Extus Oriq Overlord, which is a legendary creature, human warlock. He's a 2/4 with double strike, and he has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to your hand. But, like most Extus decks you may see, we're not super interested in the front side of this commander. We are more interested in the back side of this commander. We want to be playing Awaken the Blood Avatar, which is a whopping 6 black-red for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each creature sacrificed this way. Each opponent sacrifices a creature, create a 3/6 black and red avatar creature token with haste, and whenever this creature attacks, it deals 3 damage to each opponent. Now, a little bit of a spoiler for our upcoming themes, but the reason I actually chose Extus for this deck instead of anyone else is because Extus has a sorcery on the backside. We can play our commander as a sorcery and never actually play him as a creature, which doesn't sound incredibly useful. But when we get to our first theme, which I suppose we might as well jump to right now, this deck is 100% instants, sorceries, and lands. We are not playing a single non-land card that is not an instant or sorcery. So every single thing in here has to be one of those two card types, and I didn't want our commander to be an exception to that rule. So yes, it's a creature on the front, but because we can cast it as a sorcery, it fits pretty well with what we're trying to do. And so to further represent that, we have Goblin Wizardry, which is 3 and a red for an instant that says create 2 1/1 red Goblin Wizard creature tokens with prowess. Since we would be making tokens with prowess, which are going to get +1/+1 every time we cast a non-creature spell, this is pretty much exactly what we're looking for. We want cards that are going to benefit us from casting a ton of instants and sorceries, which is difficult to do because we only have instants and sorceries. We can't play anything that makes them cheaper or gives us benefits for casting them. We really just have to rely on things like Goblin Wizardry to make tokens or some other effect that we could use. And speaking of tokens, our second theme is actually a token theme. Because we don't run any creatures, we need to make sure that we can defend ourselves. And because Awaken the Blood avatar wants us to have a ton of tokens to sacrifice, or at least a ton of creatures to sacrifice, we want to play as many things that make us tokens as possible. So, for example, we have Secure the Wastes, which is X and a white for an instant, that says put X 1/1 white warrior creature tokens onto the battlefield. So if we have 6 open mana, we make 5 1/1 warrior creature tokens. That can be incredibly useful because it's at instant speed. So if someone attacks us, we can throw up a bunch of blockers really quickly, block, or we can untap having just cast this on our opponent's end step, and hopefully use a bunch of them to sacrifice to Awaken the Blood avatar, or maybe just pump them up with some other effects that we have, and hopefully start to win the game in that way. So we have got instants and sorceries, we've got tokens, and then finally we have sacrifice. Because Awaken the Blood avatar wants us to sacrifice our creatures, we want to have ways to benefit from that sacrifice. So for example, we have Village Rites, which is 1 black for an instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards. So that means that if we cast Secure the Wastes for X equals 5, we pay 6 mana into it, and then we use Village Rites for an additional 1, we made 4 1/1 warriors and drew 2 cards, which is pretty decent all things considered. So Village Rites is great because if someone tries to kill something, we can just draw 2 cards off of it instead. We can trigger some of our other creatures that care about things being sacrificed, our tokens. And then, of course, it helps us with Awaken the Blood avatar because we need to make more tokens to get Awaken the Blood avatar. And if we're not making those tokens, that means that we're not getting our commander. So we got to draw cards to make tokens. So Village Rites, awesome card when we're talking about sacrifice. So those are the themes for this deck, and I think the next major piece of this is to take a look at some key cards, some cards that we would really like to, well, normally I would say like to have in play, but we're not really going to put these on the battlefield. We're just going to cast them because they're all instants and sorceries. So our first key instant or sorcery is going to be Plumb the Forbidden. So this plays super well into our token and our sacrifice theme because it is 1 and a black for an instant that says as an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice 1 or more creatures. When you do, copy this spell for each creature sacrificed this way. You draw a card and lose 1 life. So if we don't sacrifice any creatures, this is 2 mana, draw a card, lose a life, which already is not terrible. But if we sacrifice 3 creatures to this, it becomes 2 mana, sacrifice 3 creatures, draw 4 cards, and lose 4 life. So if someone goes to wipe the board and we have a ton of tokens, we can just sacrifice our board instead, replace all the cards in our hand, and then all of a sudden, we looked like a threat before with all of our tokens. We're probably a much bigger threat now because now we can make even more tokens with the cards in our hand. So Plumb the Forbidden is exactly what we want to be doing. It's a great way to sacrifice our creatures and a great way to draw cards. Now, our next key card is a personal favorite of mine. We have Call the Coppercoats, which is 2 and a white for an instant. It has Strive, so it costs 1 and a white more to cast for each target beyond the first. And we can choose any number of target opponents. create X 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens, where X is the number of creatures those opponents control. So typically, in a commander game, you would have 3 opponents, so we can spend 3 mana to target 1 opponent, 5 mana for 2, or 7 mana for all 3, and then we make 1/1 human soldier creature tokens, where X is the number of creatures our opponents would control. So if we have an opposing token deck and they have a ton of tokens on board, for 3 mana, we can just match what they have. If all of our opponents have a bunch of tokens, we can just pay 7 mana, make a ton of tokens, because we're going to match every single person's board. And just like all of our other key cards have been at this point, this is at instant speed. So we can do this at our opponent's end step and really just surprise the entire table. It doesn't give our creatures haste, but because we can do it at end step, it almost does. We can untap and immediately attack with our massive army of soldier tokens. Or we can just sacrifice them all to awaken the blood avatar, and then maybe have 4 or 5 different blood avatars and just completely ruin the table from there. And moving on to our final key card of the deck, we have Ink Shield. An Ink Shield is 3 white-black for an instant that says prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you this turn. So we just fog for the turn, prevent all the damage. And for each 1 damage prevented this way, create a 2/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying. This is an absolutely absurd card for what we're trying to do here. Our main goal is to keep turning creatures sideways. We want to keep attacking our opponents throughout the game. And if we can kind of convince our opponents to attack us for a ton, we cast Ink Shield and we make a bunch of Inklings. This isn't you make 1 Inkling for preventing the damage. You make an Inkling for every 1 damage prevented. So if someone attacks us for 20 damage and we cast Ink Shield, we then make 20 2/1 Inklings, which can attack back for 40 damage. So however much damage we prevent with Ink Shield, we can swing back for double that damage. So there's always going to be times when someone might play like a Craterhoof Behemoth, swing in for what they think is an unbeatable amount of damage, like 300 or something like that, and we just say, nope, we're not going to take it. We're going to actually make 300 Inklings and then just kill the table. So Ink Shield is an all-star, and I'm very happy that we got to include it, especially since we don't have any creatures in the deck. It's a great way to protect ourselves at instant speed. But those are our key cards for the deck, and the next piece of this is to take a look at some cool interactions, some cards that work very well together. Now, I will be honest, when I was looking through the cool interactions for this deck, it was tough to find cards that synergized directly with each other because, again, we're all instants and sorceries, and we're in the Mardu colors, so it's not like we're interacting with our spells on the stack too much, but there are some pretty cool interactions in here. And so we'll start with Reverberate and Sram's Expertise. So Reverberate, one of the few ways we can interact with our spells on the stack, is red for an instant that says copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. And if we combine that with Sram's Expertise, which is 2 white for a sorcery, create 3 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature tokens. You may cast a card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. This means that if we cast Sram's Expertise and copy it with Reverberate, we get 6 1/1 servo tokens, which means that we can sacrifice them to awaken the blood avatar, we can attack people with them, but it also means we get the second line of text on Sram's Expertise as well. We would get to cast 2 cards with converted mana cost 3 or less from our hand for free. So for only 6 mana, we get 6 mana worth of cards for free, but also we get 6 1/1 servos. So this can be incredibly powerful, and unfortunately not at instant speed because Sram's Expertise is a sorcery, but still incredibly useful, and it's a great way to kind of surprise our opponents, because for 6 mana, we're essentially playing 4 cards and getting a ton of tokens. So it's hard to beat that, and I think it's definitely a pair of cards that deserve a spot in the cool interactions. And that leads us to our next cool interaction, which is going to be Dam and Rise of the Dreadmarn. So Dam is black for a sorcery. Destroy a target creature. A creature destroyed this way can't be regenerated, so we can just kill something. Or it has Overload for 2 white, which means we replace all instances of target with each, meaning that for black, we destroy target creature, but if we overload it for 2 white, we destroy each creature. So this immediately turns into a Wrath of God, destroys all the creatures on the board, and we want to pair that up with Rise of the Dreadmarn, which is 2 and a black for an instant, that says create X 2/2 black zombie berserker creature tokens, where X is the number of non-token creatures that died this turn. And it has Foretell for 1 black. So if we wipe the board full of creatures, and say we kill 10 creatures on our opponent's board, then we cast Rise of the Dreadmarn, and we make 10 2/2 zombie tokens after just wiping the board. So that means that nobody's going to be able to block, no one's going to be able to deal with it. Well, hopefully nobody's going to be able to deal with it. And we can do all of that for the low cost of 5 total mana. Because if we foretell Rise of the Dreadmarn, it only costs 1 black to cast. So all we've got to do is pay 4 to overload Dam, and then cast Rise of the Dreadmarn from foretell, meaning that we can definitely profit from any board wipes that happen, and hopefully our opponents won't be able to get back into it at that point. So those are the cool interactions. That's most of the deck tech. The last bit of this is to take a look at the price of the deck. And this week it came out to $92.43. And the most expensive card is actually a pretty recent card. It's Ruinous Ultimatum, which is $6.83 at the moment. And once we read the card, I'm sure you'll be able to understand why. But it is red, white, black for a sorcery that says destroy all non-land permanents your opponents control. We get to keep everything on our side of the board when we cast this and get rid of everything on our opponent's side. It's very difficult for our opponents to come back from this, especially if we have a massive board of tokens or things have gotten a little bit stalled. So I understand why Ruinous Ultimatum does hold the price tag that it has. However, if you are looking for some cheaper options, In Garrick's Wake is a lot more expensive in terms of mana cost, but it does the same thing, at least mostly the same thing. I think it only hits creatures and planeswalkers, so not quite as good, but it could bump down the price of the deck while still keeping the power at about the same level. But on the other hand, if you are looking to make some inclusions that bump up the price of the deck, I do have some suggestions for you there. And in our out-of-budget upgrades section for this week, we have Anguished Unmaking, which is 1 white black for an instant that says exile target non-land permanent, you lose 3 life. An absolutely phenomenal removal spell, just instant speed exile. Paying 3 life, usually not much of an issue, but it is unfortunately $8.14, so it is difficult to be able to squeeze that in. However, it's not too far out of budget. We were about $92 out of our budget, so you might be able to squeeze it in. However, if not, there are plenty of other removal spells that we have as well. So that is our first out-of-budget upgrade. And then our second out-of-budget upgrade for the week is Toxic Deluge. So again, we have another board wipe. This is 2 and a black for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, pay X life, and all creatures get -X until end of turn. So this is a complete and total board wipe for only 3 mana, which is incredibly rare. But just like Anguished Unmaking being expensive, Toxic Deluge is actually double the price of that at $16.61. So definitely out of our price range. We couldn't quite squeeze it in there. But if you are looking to upgrade some of the power, make sure that you can clear away some of your opponent's things before you start dropping your tokens on board. Toxic Deluge is an awesome include. Maybe you have one, or maybe you just don't mind the $16 price tag. But overall, an awesome card and a great include for the deck. And so finally, we are going to get into some gameplay with this deck. We got to make sure that this deck actually works. It doesn't make sense to just talk about the deck. We got to see it in action. So we are going to run this deck up against 3 opponents today. First up, we have Cyani, Eye of the Storm, and Elegith, Crossroads Augur, being played by Jason, Brea, Ethereum Shaper, being played by Shawn, and AC, Tyrant of Gyre Strait, being played by Bilal. So, Jason's deck, the Cyani and Elegith deck, he wants to play a ton of flying creatures to make use of Cyani's ability that scries X, where X is the number of attacking creatures with flying, and then partner that up with Elegith, that says if you would scry a number of cards, instead draw that many cards. So he can attack with 5 flyers, scry 5, which then turns into draw 5. And so the whole deck is built up of flyers, scry triggers, and just wanting to turn the scry into draw. Next up, we have Shawn's Brea deck. And this is an artifact-centric deck. He wants to play a ton of artifacts and kind of value out his opponents using various artifacts. Interestingly, there is a minor Thopter sub-theme from what I've seen playing this in the past, where he wants to play things like Thopter Assembly, and Brea herself makes Thopters. So being artifacts and flyers, I think Thopters are a pretty devastating way to go. I think that might cause more problems for Jason's deck than it does for ours. But I will say that out of those two decks, we don't have a ton of flyers, so I am worried about what they might do to us if we're allowing them to keep a board state. And then finally, we have Bilal's AC Tyrant of Gyre Strait deck, which is a green-blue landfall deck. So he wants to play a ton of lands, get a ton of triggers, and essentially do what Simic does, which is just make a ton of value and win the game kind of out of nowhere because they've got more lands than the rest of the table combined. So I am pretty scared of AC, not going to lie. It's a very powerful commander. Being able to draw a card whenever you play a land and play an additional land every turn is a very powerful ability. So I'm interested to see how this game goes. I think we're going to do all right. I think that the amount of board wipes we have might keep us safe in this one, but overall, I think it'll be a good game. So I hope you all enjoy it, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Jason goes first, followed by Shawn, myself, and then Bilal. Before the game, Bilal starts with Leyline of Anticipation in play since he had it in his opening hand. This allows him to play all his spells at flash speed. Then on Jason's first turn, he plays an island. Shawn plays an Arcane Sanctum. I play a Nomad Outpost. Bilal plays a Thriving Grove, naming blue so that it taps for either of his colors. Jason plays another island, and then casts Sword of the Animist. Shawn plays a Plains and casts Talisman of Hierarchy. I play a Myriad Landscape. Bilal plays a Forest. Jason plays an island and casts Warden of Evos Isle, making his flying creatures cost 1 mana less. Shawn casts a Commander Sphere, but unfortunately misses his 3rd land drop and passes. I play a Swamp. Bilal plays a Forest and casts Azusa Lost But Seeking, allowing him to play 2 extra lands on his turns, and he plays an island and passes. Jason equips Sword of the Animist to the Warden of Evos Isle, giving it +1/+1, and allowing him to search his library for a basic land and put it into play tapped whenever it attacks, which he immediately does, attacking Bilal for 3 and searching his library for an island. Then at the end of turn, I sacrifice my Myriad Landscape to search my library for 2 basic lands, putting them into play tapped. On Shawn's turn, he plays a Plains and casts his commander, Brea Ethereum Shaper, creating 2 1/1 Thopter tokens when she enters the battlefield. On my turn, I play a Plains. Bilal plays a Forest. Jason goes straight to combat, attacking me for 3, searching his library for an island and putting it into play tapped. Then in his second main phase, he casts a Spiketail Drake, which can be sacrificed to counter a spell unless the caster pays 3. Shawn casts Padim, Console of Innovation, giving his artifacts hexproof and drawing a card in his upkeep if he controls the artifact with the highest mana value. He then casts Emry, Lurker of the Lock, but in response, Jason sacrifices his Spiketail Drake, countering it since Shawn can't pay 3. Then at the end of turn, I cast Mortify to destroy Padim. On my turn, I play a Castle Ardenvale and cast Release the Gremlins for X equals 2, destroying the Sword of the Animist and Breya, creating 2/2/2 Gremlin tokens. At the end of turn, Bilal casts Jolrael Mwanvoli Recluse, which creates a 2/2 cat token whenever he draws his second card in a turn. On Bilal's turn, he simply draws and passes. Jason casts a Winged Words, drawing 2 cards, and then casts Prismatic Lens, followed up by casting his commander, Sayani Eye of the Storm, allowing him to scry X when it attacks, where X is the number of attacking creatures with flying. He then moves to combat and attacks me for 2 in the air. Shawn plays a Spectator Seating, and then casts Thopter Assembly, which returns to his hand in his upkeep and makes 5 Thopter tokens if he doesn't control any other Thopters. I play a High Market, and then attack Jason for 2 with a Gremlin, and at the end of my turn, Bilal flashes in Tatiova Benthic Druid, drawing him a card and gaining him a life whenever a land enters the battlefield under his control. On Bilal's turn, he plays a Forest, gaining a life, drawing a card, and creating a 2/2 cat token. On Jason's turn, he attacks Bilal for 5 in the air, scrying 2 with Sayani. In his second main phase, he casts Frogify on Tatiova, turning her into a 1/1 frog with no abilities, and then casts his other commander, Eligeth Crossroads Augur, allowing him to replace his scry triggers with draw triggers. Shawn casts Saheeli Sublime Artificer, creating a 1/1 servo token whenever he casts a non-creature spell, and then casts Soul Ring, making a servo. At the end of his turn, I cast Secure the Waste, creating 6 1/1 warrior tokens. Then on my turn, I play a Swamp, and sacrifice 3 warriors to cast my commander, Awaken the Blood Avatar, forcing each opponent to sacrifice a creature, while I create a 3/6 avatar token with haste that also does 3 damage to each opponent when it attacks. I then sacrifice 3 more warriors to recast Awaken the Blood Avatar, again making each opponent sacrifice a creature, while I make another avatar token. I then go to combat and attack Jason for 6, triggering both Blood Avatars and doing 6 damage to each opponent. At the end of my turn, Bilal casts his commander, AC Tyrant of Gyre Strait, which allows him to play an additional land on his turns, and also draws a card whenever a land enters under his control. On Bilal's turn, he plays the Lumbering Falls, drawing a card and creating a 2/2 cat token, and then casts Soul Ring, followed up by casting Return of the Wild Speaker, drawing 5 cards since he controls a creature with 5 power. After that, he plays a Misty Rainforest, drawing a card, plays an Island, drawing a card, and also plays another Forest, drawing a card. After that, he casts a Jeweled Lotus and passes. Jason plays an Island, and then casts Ichthyomorphosis, turning AC into a 0/1 fish with no abilities. In response, Bilal sacrifices Misty Rainforest to search his library for a Mystic Sanctuary and putting it into play. This lets him put Return of the Wild Speaker back on top of his library, and then he draws it with AC's ability. Then Jason's spell resolves and his commander becomes a fish. In Jason's second main phase, he casts Tempsis All-Seeing, and then attacks Bilal for 2 in the air. Shawn casts a Summoning Station, which can tap to create a 2/2 Pincher token and untaps when an artifact goes to Shawn's graveyard from the battlefield. This also triggers Saheeli, making a servo token. He then activates Summoning Station, making a Pincher token. Then, at the end of turn, I cast Fracture to destroy Bilal's Leyline of Anticipation. On my turn, I play a Plains, and then cast Ruinous Ultimatum, destroying all non-land permanents I don't control. In response, Shawn sacrifices his Commander Sphere to draw a card. Once the board wipe resolves, I cast a Forbidden Friendship, making a 1/1 Human Soldier token and a 1/1 Dinosaur token with haste. After that, I move to combat, attacking Bilal for 11 with my entire board, doing 6 damage to each opponent on attacks. Unfortunately for me though, before the damage, Bilal casts Aetherize to return all attacking creatures to their owner's hand, which is especially devastating since I only have tokens. On Bilal's turn, he casts Avenger of Zendikar, creating 10 0/1 plant tokens since he controls 10 lands, and he then plays a Forest, triggering the Avenger and putting a +1/+1 counter on each plant he controls. After that, he casts Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, sacrificing it when it enters, drawing a card, gaining 3 life, and putting a Forest into play, again putting a counter on all of his plants. He follows that up by casting a Rampant Growth, searching his library for yet another basic land and putting it into play tapped, putting another counter on all of his plants. On Jason's turn, he casts Alrund's Epiphany, making 2 1/1 bird tokens and taking an extra turn after this one. He then passes to his extra turn, plays an island, and then attacks Bilal for 2 in the air. Then in his second main phase, he casts River's Rebuke to put all of Bilal's non-land permanents back into his hand, and also casts a Fairy Vandal, which gets a +1/+1 counter when he draws his second card each turn. Shawn plays a Reliquary Tower and passes. I also just untap and pass. On Bilal's turn, he casts Coma Cosmos Serpent and passes. In Jason's upkeep, Coma makes a 3/3 Coil token, but in response to the token being made, I cast Hagra Mauling to destroy Coma. In response to that, Bilal casts Return of the Wildspeaker to draw 6 cards. Jason then plays an island, and casts Wind Reader Sphinx, drawing him a card whenever a creature with flying attacks, and he goes to combat, attacking Bilal with 3 flying creatures, drawing 3 cards, putting a +1/+1 counter on Fairy Vandal, and then Bilal takes 4 damage, and in Jason's second main phase, he foretells a card. Shawn casts an Unwinding Clock, untapping all of his artifacts on each other player's untapped step. And at the end of Shawn's turn, I activate Castle Ardenvale, making a 1/1 human token. On my turn, I attack Shawn for 2 and pass. Bilal casts Nissa Who Shakes the World, letting all his forests tap for an additional green mana, and this allows him to recast his commander Aesi before playing an island and drawing a card. He then plays a second land, a Temple of Mystery, scrying 1 and drawing another card. After that, he activates Nissa's +1 ability, untapping Temple of Mystery, turning it into an elemental creature and putting 3 +1/+1 counters on it. He's then able to cast a Palinchron, untapping 7 lands when it enters. In response, I cast Crackling Doom, forcing each opponent to sacrifice their creature with the highest power and lose 2 life. Then, the Palinchron resolves, and thanks to Nissa, he's able to make enough mana to activate Palinchron, return it to his hand, and cast it again, while still having mana left over. This lets him generate an infinite amount of mana and eventually cast Tidespout Tyrant and Woodfall Primus to return or destroy all permanents he doesn't control to their owner's hand. At that point, none of us have a way to win, so we decide to concede, winning Bilal the game. Alright, so that was a pretty sweet game. I was very impressed by what our deck did. It's unfortunate that Bilal had that Aetherize when he did, because I think we really could have done some damage if he hadn't been able to wipe our board there. Overall, for everyone else's decks, I think they all did pretty well. I think that Shawn got hurt pretty early on when he started missing land drops, and unfortunately my Ruinous Ultimatum took out most of his mana base because it was artifacts, so I do feel a little bit bad about that one. I think Jason pretty much did what his deck wanted to do. He played a bunch of flyers and attacked people and drew some cards and did what mono blue flyers probably wants. And then Bilal's deck, I think I rightly predicted that was a pretty scary deck. He just kind of, again, did exactly what Simic wanted to do, and in this case just drew a bunch of cards, played a bunch of lands, and really got that value train rolling, and none of us could find a way to really stop it. So I think overall, pretty good game, but if you are interested in seeing anything more like this in the future, please do let me know. If you have suggestions for future cards, I would love to hear them. You can put them in the comments of this video. You can send them to me on Twitter, Reddit, email, whatever. And please do like the video and subscribe as well. I appreciate all of that support. But with all of that, I hope you all enjoyed the deck tech, the video, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.